Our next step in organizing the lights out code is getting rid of all these global variables. And we do that by creating a class that is going to contain all this information. And I'm going to call this class client. And that is similar to how we have a server class that contains all the information about how to get to the repository and these sorts of things, how to get to the JSON object mapper. So here we have a similar thing. It's the client. And the client is going to have this static method that I'm calling main. And it's similar to Java's static void main. And what it does is just this part, the code that runs at the top level, the code that initiates the whole application. And on the top level, I want to call client main. In Java, this call is implicit. That's what the Java runtime does when it starts. But in JavaScript, there is no such thing, so we have to be explicit. And all these variables, these global variables, they're still going to be effectively global variables, but under the name client, which is a more principled way of having this. So what we want is to have them as static attributes or static variables. But in JavaScript, there is no way for us to say, here I want some games repository equals something. So this is the code we could write in Java, or at least we could write code similar to that. And in JavaScript, there is a proposal for this code to be allowed in the future, but currently it doesn't exist. So our way to work around this is to have this, after the definition of client, we can still change what client does. So we are going to say that the client dot game element is a new game element, and so on. So these are still effectively global variables, but they are under this client namespace, which is a more principled way of having it. Now, everywhere we want to use game element or games repository or game, we have to be explicit where we are getting it from. So in the controller, for instance, here we have game element. I have to say client.gameElement. I have to fetch it from that namespace. And I have to do it everywhere. Anywhere I'm using game, anywhere I'm using the game repository, and so forth. So I'm going to do that in fast forward. Okay, we are back. And I prefixed all the necessary things with client dot. And it still works. I can go to the browser, I can refresh, and I can play the game, I can cheat, I can create a new game, and it all just works. So now all we've done is to extract this guy, this client class, into its own namespace. It's just a more principled way of doing things. Now let's take another look at what we have here. We have the game element, we have models, we have repository, and we have a controller. They are all under the same file, which is a bad thing. We would like to separate this in different files. That is the topic of our next and last video.